Today in Pierre, lawmakers locking in key budget decisions, including funding for South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
In our top story at 6, State House reporter Grant Green has the details on how that network secured the win.
When known proposed their cuts, officials at South Dakota Public Broadcasting were just as surprised as the public. However, in the few months they've had to pitch their side, they were able to convince appropriators that what they do is worth the funding. Appropriators agreed to the full $5.6 million that South Dakota Public Broadcasting requested, rejecting NOM's proposal to reduce funding down to $1.9 million. Executive Director Julie Overgaard said she worried about the lasting effect of NOM's proposed cut.
All of those local things that really are unique to us, that tell South Dakota's story, that travel the state and talk about our people and places and things and events and what's happening to us, I think that would have all largely been lost.
Overgaard said her and others with the network were not sure what amount of funding they would receive. The Joint Appropriations Committee approved of their funding unanimously.
When we were presented the information on how public broadcasting serves South Dakota, it became very immediately apparent for all of us we could not make any cut whatsoever, especially knowing that public broadcasting has been cut multiple times over the past couple of years.
Muckey said he believed that NOM had a lack of understanding of just how capable the network can make up the funding if the state were to have made those cuts. Representative Eric Muckey told Dakota News Now that he is confident, at least through next year, that South Dakota Public Broadcasting won't have to worry about any more cuts. In Pierre, Grant Green, Dakota News Now.